All right, and we are live. Good evening, everyone. I think we have audio, video, everything's good. You know what? Hold it. Let me move the mic a little bit closer to me. That makes sense. There we go. All right, so welcome, everyone. I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, I think, and there's a couple other holidays mixed in there as well. Hope everyone had a great, happy holidays. We are getting ready for the New Year's, the last chat for 2022, and we've had a crazy year. We've had some severe thunderstorms. We've had massive heat waves. We had one of the coldest Christmases. And a little bit of snow, a little bit. Like I said, out there in eastern Long Island, you had a little bit of ocean effect snow coming off of the Long Island Sound over eastern Long Island. But the main question tonight, I know everyone's wondering, is winter canceled? Is the whole pattern going to collapse? Are we not going to have winter storms? Are we not going to have snow? So let's tackle that, and also let's look at the pattern that we're dealing with right now. And I'm already getting a lot of great questions in the premium chat. I'm seeing Rob Allen. How you doing, Rob? Asking a lot of great questions about the MJO and about the WPO and the EAMT, positive, negative. So I get it. There's a lot to go over. And weather Twitter is all over the place. And typically this time of year, we typically have a lot of emotional outbursts. Because for whatever reason, even though I did warn everyone, like, hey, look, it's really difficult to pull off a white Christmas. And I say that every year. And I say that, with the fact that I put up a chart and say, look, there's about a 10% chance that you're able to pull it off in the northern mid-Atlantic. But still, people get upset because they don't see the pattern they want. And now, the one that we just got done with, that we're ending right now, had a lot of potential. Probably the best potential I've seen in 10 years, which is all true. The problem, and this was a great example of just short waves not interacting at the right time. And so you get your cold air, you get your stormy pattern, but they don't work together to produce your major snowfall events. And the reason why is because there was a lot of displacement going on in the atmosphere, and part of that had to do with the mountain torque forcing the ridge to be a little bit too close to the west coast. And as a result, you couldn't get that ridge axis to build over the Rockies, and so you couldn't get your short waves to align. So I think part of that had to do with the state of the WPO, and I also thought that had to do with the fact that La Nina was still having a pretty good influence on the weather pattern. Combine that with the way that the polar vortex stretched and the timing of that, everything was just a hair off. Literally just, in some cases, with our first major winter storm, but the Arctic air mass, about 3 hours away from being a massive blizzard on the East Coast. But instead, those 3 hours lost on the Wednesday before Christmas led to just pretty much a rainstorm. So where are we now? Well, right now we have plenty of warm air invading. Let's put up the information here. Here we go. We have warm air invading. We have a relaxation in the jet stream. So you're seeing a lot of your low pressure systems lifting up towards the Great Lakes. Warm air from the Gulf Coast surging northward. You have your subtropical jet stream suppressed down here towards Florida. You have a nice ridge over the east. Your polar jet stream is amplified. Your Arctic jet stream is locking the Arctic air up here. And so here comes our thaw and relaxation. And we literally are going from some of the coldest air that we've seen in 30 years for Christmas to some of the warmest air we've seen in 30 years for New Year's Eve. So we've gone one major flip, okay? A major wave of extreme temperatures from one extreme to the other. So what is happening in the atmosphere now? That would make me pause and look at the whole pattern. Okay, so where are we at? Right now, we know we've had disruption with the polar vortex. We know that we have the slightly above normal snowfall in Siberia to contend with, and the building heights and the impressive Arctic air in Siberia, which would be a signal to disrupting and possibly stretching the polar vortex. And I'll show you some data on how that is starting to evolve. We have our La Nina state, which has been an influence in our weather pattern, but we've had an unusual state in our weather pattern in the fact that the subtropical jet stream has been pretty active, which we can see here. As you can see, this subtropical jet stream has been able to send shortwave after shortwave. It is not typical of a moderate La Nina. Usually a moderate La Nina, you get basically a very weak subtropical jet stream. And so typically what you end up with is almost no convection here. And what we've seen here is flare-ups. So when we've seen the flare-ups occur, that's when we start to see our storms in the east. And that is usually dictated by the evolution of, where are we? Here we are, SOI data, which goes negative whenever we see those flare-ups, and then our storms in the east. But again, timing wasn't right. So, what's changing now? Well, we still have our forcing that is evolving here. We still have that showing up here with our increasing ozone values, which means you're seeing mass displacement being pushed northward. The influence from the volcano that we talked about at the beginning of winter still is a factor. It's starting to influence the polar vortex in Antarctica, but that has not influenced anything in terms of the northern hemisphere. So you still have that mass displacement going on. Meanwhile, you still have your EP flux. Now, what does this mean? This means you still have air masses, and let me move this forward here. Right now, actually, this is perfect. One second. Okay, so this is the state right now. And what this state shows here is that you're not getting any transport from the troposphere into the stratosphere. So as a result, that allows your polar vortex to strengthen. But as we move forward, the forecast clearly changes. And now we're down to about 5 days out, which usually is pretty strong in terms of reliability. And we're seeing this on the European and the GFS. Why is this important? What does this tell me? This tells me that you were returning our transport from the troposphere, where we are, to the stratosphere, where the polar vortex is. And this is happening from basically 1,000 millibars down at the surface all the way up to about 30 millibars. Not so much at 10 millibars, but there's some influence. So what does this mean? This means we are able to transport warm air from the troposphere to the stratosphere. You're allowed to have that disruption. And so with that disruption, what you start to see is more of a heat flux. So let's go 5 days out. You can start to see that influence starting to take shape. And then 10 days out, it becomes even stronger. So there's your disruption with the polar vortex. But there's other changes happening in the tropical forcing. So what we've been watching for some time is how fast does La Nina weaken. And in the surface, let me just scroll up to that, we've started to see some pretty fast weakening. Not so much in Nino 4, it's been kind of gradual, but Nino 3.4, where we take a lot of our observations and where we strongly focus on in terms of whether or not we have a La Nina or El Nino, that has started to weaken. It's now down to minus 0.8 degrees Celsius. Nino 1 plus 2, where we had the coldest values, that's pretty much near neutral. So that alone would not sway me to say, okay, this La Nina is about to collapse, because you could easily have a shift in the winds and a re-intensification of La Nina with these surface values. And you never want to just go with the surface values. But what caught my eye, and several other meteorologists, by the way, is what's happening in the subsurface. And I've been saying this since November. Look at the steady moderation. Why is this important? Well, remember, with La Nina, you're taking water that is below the surface, colder water, and you're bringing it up, right? And so what that allows for with the winds is that the cold area of water to expand. That support in the subsurface is going away, and pretty dramatically so. It is rapidly weakening. If you watch this since October 30th, and now moving through all November into December, to now we are starting to get towards January, you're seeing this steady weakening. And when you see this signal here that's rapidly weakening, that supports at the very least an evolution where your La Nina state is going to fade away into a neutral state. There are some who are saying, hey, look, this could go translate into an El Nino state. I think that's way too fast, and I wouldn't expect anything like that until later in the spring. So let's just focus on a neutral state evolution. And we can also see that in various other observations. This is from pmel.noaa.gov. It's another source of observations. And this, again, is the subsurface. Let me zoom in here. And we went from well below normal to above normal sea surface temperatures. This is updated every day, whereas the previous data I was showing is updated once a week. So what this shows me is the trend of where we're going. And again, this is from basically the date line. You could go all the way to 160 east. Okay, so that's the edge of ESNO to 100 west. So basically you got your entire basin. And at the subsurface, especially 100 to 200 meters down, you basically have completely lost your cold pool. So your support for La Nina continuing is gone. That's why there's so many people who are very confident that La Nina is about to literally collapse, because the support for it has been ripped away. Now, what that will do with our, let's see here, with our SOI, if I can find it, there it is. What will happen with the SOI is that in your daily values, you'll start to see more and more of an influence from the MJO. And in your monthly and seasonal values, you'll start to see more and more of a steady drop. Now we're kind of leveling off, especially the seasonal values, and then we'll start to see a rapid decline. How the atmosphere will respond is dependent on what we see with the MJO, which is another forcing mechanism. So let me pull that up. And what I'm seeing now from the long-range models, and I think that this whole changing state is going to be very difficult for the models to handle, so expect a lot of phantom storms, a lot of phantom weather patterns once you get past 5 days, as we have been seeing, because the models are picking up a lot of these changes happening. But one thing I've been seeing consistently is the MJO being forecasted in these longer range guidance going out through near the end of January into phase 8, 1, and 2. The CFS, 8, 1, and 2. European, 8, 1, and 2. This one, 8, 1, and 2, but a little bit closer to a neutral circle, but still the same kind of result. Let's see, I believe this is the Australian guidance, which is a little bit towards neutral, but still on that side. Canadian's heading in that range. And I think that the MJO is going to still be weak because it's still going to be battling those influences. So you're going to see a lot of changes. Now, how that influences with the mountain torque, which we watch over in Asia, is still an unknown factor. And it could lead to everything being displaced a little bit to the west or to the east. I don't know yet, but it's certainly a factor that we're going to have to monitor. I wouldn't be confident in the idea that it would completely short circuit the whole winter pattern, because I think there's a lot of changing factors, and I think that the other factors that we're discussing now are more important than the WPO or the mountain torque. I think that will be influenced by what's happening here, not the other way around. Of course, I could be wrong, but I think that's where we're heading in that respect. And so what I did is I went back and I looked at other years where we had a triple La Nina state and watched and looked for a rapid decline. The only one I could really find anywhere close was the winter of 75-76, specifically the January and February time period of 1976. Take that for what you may. But this also was under the influence of a stronger polar vortex as well. So I'm not that impressed with the comparison, but if you're looking for a similar year of a triple dip La Nina with rapid weakening, the 75-76 winter, specifically the January-February period of 1976, would be your closest connection. I really couldn't find any other years where we had a similar setup. Even that, the Northern Pacific was warmer than what we saw in 76. So that's your best connection. So again, I think that we're dealing with a year where we have a lot of firsts between what's happened with the volcano, what's happening with the polar vortex, and how La Nina is evolving. So a lot of interesting features all playing out here in the seasonal pattern and how this is all playing, how this is all interacting. And one thing that is constantly showing up in the guidance, if I pull it up here, I find the right one sooner or later. Sometimes I got too much data. Oh, here we are. Okay, so what I'm seeing in the 500 millibar pattern, I wanted to explain to you what's happening over the next 10 days, is that we are in a state of change. And you know that is happening because when you start to see the polar and subtropical jet stream producing a lot of waves, what this tells you is that you have a lot of change getting ready to set up in the 500 millibar pattern. When you start to see trough after trough, so beware of false storms. Like for example, the January 6th, 7th period. I know a lot of people have been focusing on that time period for the potential for snow. And as I told premium members, and I'll tell you this right now, this is a perfect scenario of thread the needle, even for the interior, where everything has to work out perfectly because you have so much change going on in the atmosphere. All these short waves are moving very quickly. So you literally have to have perfect timing in order to get any type of snowfall or any type of major storm. You certainly should stay away from any solution that shows a major storm, at least until about January, let's say after January 12th. And the reason why is because there's literally no blocking here. You just have everything moving very quickly. So you have polar air masses coming in, coming out. You have Pacific air masses marching across the country. You have a lot of air mass clashes, but you don't have anything to slow down the storms. So at least until January 10th, I would not trust any guidance that shows any type of major snowfall until you get under the, I'd say, 90-hour period. Because you're going to have so many shortwaves marching across the country, it's going to create a lot of model volatility, a lot of false echoes, so to speak. So I wouldn't really trust anything during that time period in terms of any snowfall or major storms or anything of that nature. I'm not saying it can't happen. I wouldn't get excited about anything beyond 5 days. I'll put it that way. If you see something where it's snowing in your backyard and you're all excited, I'd temper that a bit until we start to get to the middle of January. Now, what's interesting is that in the long-range guidance, and this is true on the GFS and the GFS ensembles and the European ensembles, we continue to see this trough around the Aleutians, ridge on the west coast. This is where you want to have your ridge. You want to have your ridge here because this allows you your amplification. And there's your trough in the east and your trough axis right around the Mississippi River Valley. Now, if you get you don't need a strong negative NAO. You just need a weak one, right? Just to slow down your low pressure development over the coastal waters. That can open up your winter storm effects, your winter storm potential, should I say. So you can get your low pressure systems developing out here, shooting up towards the mid-Atlantic coast, or redeveloping, shooting up. So you have a lot more potential once you get to this point. And we constantly see this showing up as we move beyond January 10th. And I like that based on a lot of the observations. And it lines up nicely to the idea of a weakening La Nina state. As for the 4th of July, the New Year's celebration, I honestly, I never really get excited about New Year's celebrations. I don't get it personally. Going out into New York City, into Times Square, getting shuttled into like 600 people, 6,000 people, 6 million people, whatever it is, it's too many people, all logged in. You can't go anywhere. You can't go to the bathroom, can't do anything to watch a ball drop. Not my thing. But if you want to go out there and have fun with that, well, you're going to be dealing with some rainfall. You have a nice little shortwave coming in. You know that it's going to be rainfall because the shortwave axis is back here towards the Great Lakes. Plenty of divergence and diffluence setting up. And let's actually go right to about 1 a.m. into the new year. And you have that strong shortwave lifting through. You have plenty of warm air transport off the coast. Plenty of mid-level lifting. And that opens you up to a nice little rainfall setting up right around when you're ringing in the new year. So if you are planning on going out, I would suggest having an umbrella. This looks like, again, it's a fast-moving low-pressure system because, again, when we take a look at the 500 millibar pattern here, there's no block. There's nothing really to slow this down. So I think it's a quick inch and a half of rain. For the coastal plain, I don't see this being a flood potential. Potentially for the Poconos and Catskills, with that heavier rainfall and your snowpack melting, that could lead to some urban flooding and some flooding in your basement, so just be aware of that. But in terms of the rest of the region, I don't really see this as a significant factor. If you're up in Buffalo, I mean, God, those guys have had enough issues. If you have any friends and family up around the Great Lakes, especially around western New York, all that snow is going to be melting with a high water content, by the way, combined with that rainfall is going to lead to some flooding issues. So they're going to have even more problems. So God bless them. It's rough up there right now for that winter. And again, in this pattern, you have a lot of short waves coming through. You have a lot of interaction. There's your January 5th, 6th period. Could you see something set up here? If you get interaction just right, this is a perfect example I was talking about. The ridge axis, watch the ridge axis in the west. You see how that's moving progressively? That makes it really difficult for any low pressure system to really lock in along the coast. So it makes timing really difficult. So yeah, there's plenty of short waves. You got some cold air on the backside, pretty good short wave with some nice polar air. If you get the timing just right, maybe the cold air gets in there just ahead of the precipitation and you can end up with some wintry mischief. But I just don't like it. I really don't. I would not be very confident in being excited about any type of storm threat in this time period, given this pattern. You don't want to forecast any type of winter weather activity with this type of progressive pattern. Plenty of storms, plenty of potential, but it's probably not going to pan out, given what I'm seeing here. I'm just going to be straight with you guys. I don't want to tell you, when I think a pattern's really favorable, I'll say it. And even then, as you know, with December, what we went through, I kept on saying, look, the timing has to be right. Plenty of potential, but the timing has to be right. In this case, plenty of short waves, plenty of interaction going on in the short waves, but because of the progressive nature of it, no, not my cup of tea. I would not say that this is a winter storm pattern. It's an active pattern. It's one of those patterns where you warm up and then cool down, and you get rain and then some snow in the back end, maybe some snow showers and lake effect snow, but that is about it. So that's it for my rant tonight. I am going to answer your questions, and we'll go from there. And it looks like we have plenty of activity here on YouTube, and we also have, of course, our live chat, so we'll answer that and see where we go from there. So let me scroll back here. Okay. Not good questions. Okay, so I already answered Rob Allen's questions about the MJO and the WPO and the E and the Mountain Torque, basically. Let's see here. In your discussions, you touch on the MJO forecast. Okay, so the MJO, I don't see it. I don't like the idea of it becoming. Let's see here. Where's that data? Here it is. I don't like the idea of a sustained strong MJO state. I like the idea of somewhere between what the European ensembles is showing and what the GFS is doing. So somewhere in here. So a weak MJO, but strong enough to influence the pattern to keep a trough in the eastern United States. And when you have this type of state in 8 and 1, let me pull up the climatology of that. So let's say January, February, March. When you're in 8 and 1, you typically have below normal temperatures in the eastern United States. So 8, 1, and 2. Right now we are going through phases 5, 6, and 7. So obviously pretty mild, right? But when you are seeing this signal here, the MJO, in my opinion, is not the most dominant feature, but it's certainly a signal of where we're going. I've been hearing a lot on with the Twitter on the WPO. Okay, so what a lot of people are looking at with the WPO is the influence of convection. Which, let me see here. Here we are. So they're seeing this. But that's under the influence of your La Nina state. That's still strong enough to influence this convection. If the La Nina collapses, then this convection shifts towards the date line because you no longer have your gradient suppressing the convection. And that lines up with the MJO, with what the MJO is saying, okay? If that forecast verifies, and we showed every long-range forecast basically going in that direction, that all points to convection firing back up here. So then that mutes the WPO. In fact, it will change the WPO influence. But as it stands right now, this convection, based on the Mountain Torque influence and WPO influence, that is why we're seeing that displacement of our ridge axis. And now we're seeing this progressive pattern across the Pacific. Notice looking at Earth New School that while the 10 millibar vortex is a lot stronger, it is still rather large with edges of circulation still well into the mid-latitudes. While 70 millibars is still mostly weak with an almost vortex within a vortex, like a double eye. All right, let's take a look. Let's take a look at what he is looking at. So here's our vortex at 10 millibars. And it's pretty strong. When you see a donut like this, this means that it is a strong polar vortex. And this starts to keep your Arctic air focused towards Canada and Siberia and Greenland. At 70 millibars, it's much stronger than what we were seeing at the beginning of the winter. But again, you can see some of the influences of disruption here. So what should happen based on what we're seeing with the data is that we'll see more of a stretching at 70 millibars than we will at 10 millibars. But that stretching at 50 and 70 millibars is going to signal the potential for your polar and Arctic air masses sitting up here to head into North America and then down towards the mid-latitudes. Let's see here. If social media existed back in 95, 96, like it does now, I guarantee there would have been a lot of early January winter canceled hysteria. Yeah, there typically is. I mean, it never fails. 70 millibars in southern hemisphere has polar vortex during the summer. Wow. Yeah. Well, look, it's a different environment when you're dealing with the evolution of the troposphere and stratosphere in the Antarctic for several reasons. One, the Arctic has oceans, so there's a lot more different interactions in that respect, in terms of gradients, in terms of friction and land, whereas in the Antarctic, it's one large continent with ice. So you can build up the cold air a lot more, and you could build up a unique environment in the Antarctic than you would in the Arctic. It's two different type of environments because it's multiple different types of factors. So I always say, I know a lot of people try to connect what's going on in the Antarctic to what's going on in the Arctic. That is a major mistake because you're dealing with two completely different environments from the surface all the way up into the stratosphere. It's not a good idea to make a comparison between the two. The 70 millibar vortex have a greater influence on the troposphere than the 10 millibar, especially in this type of situation. This year, it certainly is true. 10 millibars I like to use as your signal, but it's hard to use that given the factors that we've already discussed. But in normal years, I like to use 10 millibars as my bellwether to see where the pattern is going in terms of high latitude blocking potential in the stratosphere. So if this was any other winter, I'd look at 10 millibars and I'd say, okay, I'm not seeing a lot of support for major stratospheric warming, at least not for the next 3-4 weeks. So I do see support for stretching, so that could be a bellwether, and then I have to see whether that develops in the lower stratosphere. In terms of more immediate impacts, I always look at the lower stratosphere than the upper stratosphere, but the upper stratosphere gives me kind of a signal of where we're going. Will there be high potential for winter storms around DMV in the second half of January into February? I want to be careful how I answer this. Okay. There will be increased potential. I don't want to say high potential until I actually see the pattern. Fair? Because we could end up with a pattern much like December. I'm just being honest with you. Where we have everything locked in just right, but the short waves are off by just a little bit. As I said all the way back in the winter forecast. Favorable pattern, but you still have to watch to see how the short waves interact. So I would say we're going to be much better than what we are right at this moment right now, especially with warm air surging in. I would say also that I would not be surprised if a lot of people forget about winter canceled by the time we get to January 15th, 16th, and beyond. So we'll see how that plays out, but that's where I see the pattern going. Looks like the Indian Ocean has cooled off more. Does that not only help kill La Nina, but also impact the MJO state? And this is why 7812 is being forecast by those models. It is a bellwether. It is an indication that we're moving in that direction. Joshua asks, I don't recall hearing that we would be warming up so dramatically. Also, it's been several years since we had a sustained cold winter in the eastern United States. Well, let me answer that first of all. I said several times that we would end up with a thaw at some point in January. Granted, this is happening a little bit faster by a week than what I thought when I issued my winter forecast in October. I thought we'd probably see this warm up around the 10th to the 15th. Instead, we're seeing it from the 1st to the 10th. So I was off by a little bit on that. But I did say we'd end up with a thaw. So, admit it, it's earlier than I thought it would be. I was off by a week back in the October forecast. But we definitely talked about it. In terms of sustained cold winter, there is not... I want you to go study climatology. And I want you to find me a winter where we did not have a warm pattern in that winter. And I guarantee you, you will not find one until you get to the 1800s. The idea, even in our most impressive winters of all time, the highest snowfall, the coldest temperatures, you always had a thaw. Because much like in the summer where you do not have sustained heat waves all summer, you do not have sustained cold waves all summer. There's always a relaxation. There's always a break in whatever pattern that we happen to have for that season. And so to look for a sustained cold winter based on the definition of never having a warm-up, you'd have to find one where we have a winter, a supervolcano influencing it. See, so you have to go all the way back to the 1800s to really have that. Even your snowiest winter had a moderation, a warm period, major floods, rain all the way up into New England. It's happened. In fact, in the winter of 95-96, because I know people are going to bring that up, we had one storm where we had snow to start, and then we had thunderstorms with temperatures in the 60s and heavy rain, which caused significant flooding throughout New Jersey, the Hudson River Valley, all the way up into the Green and White Mountains. And then 3 weeks later, we had a string of blizzards that followed. Any flooding concerns for New Year? Not really. I'm not expecting much in the way of significant flooding concerns, but I would watch out if you have any drains that are clogged or blocked. I'd definitely watch out for that. Are you sticking with your winter forecast? Yes. I think that the timing of this relaxation was off by a week, so I do apologize for that. In terms of my overall thoughts, the December pattern worked out in terms of the pattern, what I was looking for. And I did warn you guys, less than 10% chance for a white Christmas, which tells you about the snow potential around here in December. But I like the way that the pattern evolved. I like what I'm seeing in the observations. I would be concerned about the winter forecast if I did not see any weakening of La Nina. If La Nina remained moderate, if it stayed where the eastern zone was like minus 1.7 right now, I would be very concerned about my winter forecast completely busting. But because I'm seeing that weakening in the tropical forcing, and because I'm seeing what's going on with the influence of the EP flux stretching our polar vortex again, I don't really see a reason right now to change anything. I see a potential there for an active storm track, potential for the polar and subtropical jet streams to interact. I'm seeing a lot of that potential. And again, to remind you, most of our snowfall, climatologically speaking, usually happens from January 10th through about February 15th or so. So right now, it would be a bad idea to change any winter forecast based on what I'm seeing right now. But if I was seeing that La Nina was remaining strong, if I was seeing the subsurface was remaining very cold, that would have concerned me. That would be like, uh-oh, I made a mistake. There's an error in the winter forecast because La Nina is going to remain too strong. But I don't see that right now, as you saw with the observations. My guess would be either the year without a summer. Yep, that's right. That's pretty much it. Or you can go back to the little ice age. Yes, you could definitely do that one too. Although the data, of course, naturally is not as well supported or reliable. But yeah, you can go back there too. So either a supervolcano or a little ice age. All right, now let's check out YouTube. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Okay, also heard from EPA-WA, good meteorologist, good guy, that the jet extension to the west, which is going to be responsible for milder than normal temperature the next 10 to 14 days. Yeah, that's essentially, here, hold it, let's say here. That's this. This right now. See, this jet streak right here, cutting across from Japan all the way to the West Coast, it's going to send shortwave after shortwave right into the West Coast and right through the eastern United States. Now, that doesn't preclude you from having cold air push into the northern mid-Atlantic and whatnot, but it makes it really, really difficult to pull off a winter storm and sends a lot of Pacific air into the eastern United States, into all of the United States. Now, the one thing that I would say, if you're looking for a return to the strong ridge, is the fact that we have this upper level low hanging around here around the Aleutians. If this is able to dig, and I think it will, in response to our weakening La Nina state, watch for a ridge to start to build right around Alaska and the Gulf of Alaska, and that's going to extend into the West Coast. And we're starting to see a slight indication of that starting to show up. But I would say we're about 7 days out from really seeing it really mature. Let's see here. Let's see. So much for favorable pattern and cold New Year's. Well, I mean, it was still a favorable pattern, but yeah, definitely not a cold New Year's. Let's see here. Pretty much I answered the whole snowstorm potential. Long-range forecaster from AccuWeather LC is saying winter could be locking in from end of January through February for some winter weather like we have never seen in quite a few winters. I never like to make those type of statements. You know how I feel about greatest, worst winter ever, blah, 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 blah. Because, first of all, it's subjective to where you're at. God knows I've seen so many times where everyone else is getting 12 inches of snow, but the one person I told that to ends up getting half that because of where they happen to be or where the storm set up. I would say this. If you think winter's over, you might be in for a bit of a surprise. But to say historic or, let's see here. What was it again? Have not seen quite a few winters. And it's dangerous because we just went through December where we had everything locked in. You had a strong negative NAO pattern. You had your ridge popping in the west. You had almost everything come together, but one little thing was off. So we already been through that. One little thing. Just one little bit of timing. You really want to make that statement? I try to stay away from those statements because then it leads to a lot of misunderstanding. Winter is not over. I think the pattern returns, and I think we're going to be more active. That's where I'll go with that. And I think we'll still see more polar air masses invading. Could see more and more Arctic air mass pushing into the United States. But I'll stay away from the historic wording just yet until we actually see the pattern. Let's see here. What? Christmas wasn't cold enough for everyone. Look, that was insanely cold Christmas. You know, the one thing I will say this is that talking to kids about Christmas when it came to Santa Claus, it was really cool to have those chats saying, hey, you know, is Santa going to be okay because of the cold weather? So then I just reminded them, like, hey, look, Santa lives in the Arctic. He's used to this. This is like a normal day for him. So he'll be fine. You, on the other hand, should probably bundle up and stay safe because you'll get frostbite. But yeah, it was probably one of the coldest winters I've experienced since I was a little kid. And it was nice to see the flurries on Friday, getting a little bit of snow. You know, I had a little dusting on the lawn there, so I consider that a white Christmas. There we go. So, it wasn't what everyone wanted, but it's what you got. And at least you were able to travel. Or imagine being in Western New York, not being able to see your family because you're stuck in the snow or worse. So we have that. Let's see. Looking for more questions here. We're good with YouTube. Pretty good answers. Again, pretty good questions here tonight. I really appreciate it. So here's what I think is going to happen with this jet stream. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. The first signal for our changing weather pattern is going to be in the Pacific. As La Nina is weakening, this jet streak here is going to have to weaken a little bit. So that way you can start to see the trough deepen and this ridge build. When that happens, then over the next 10 days is when we see our pattern changing. That's why I like January 12th to the 15th to see that change. The models are starting to pick up on that potential based on the way that the jet stream becomes wavy, because you start getting this wave break. So it starts to break up this jet stream and starts to allow for the amplification of your ridge and trough. Once that happens, then all your polar and Arctic air up here around the Arctic Circle and around northern Canada will then start to push south. And that is when we start to see our transition. Will Tennessee be warm enough so they don't have power issues for Cowboys versus Titans game tomorrow? Yeah, they should be more than warm enough. I don't see any issues. In fact, let's zoom out here. Let's see, where are our temperatures? Yeah, they're in the 40s and 50s. They should be fine. No power issues there, which was kind of disappointing to see, to be honest with you. I mean, I know that there's more people, more power outages and whatnot, but I don't know. I thought that we'd be able to sustain the influence of cold air a little bit better, but apparently not. 250 millibar wave break at the end of that jet works its way well into the southern hemisphere. Let's see here. I mean, this feature right here. Yeah, I mean, if you take it, it goes all the way down, and you can see how air masses interact even between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. This isn't anything new, though. This isn't anything too unusual. But you can see, even here, how active the subtropical jet stream is, which is really unusual for La Nina, that I would normally expect. I would expect this jet stream to be a lot weaker, but not this year. And, another thing, too, is that our southeast ridge, even though it is pumping over the next 7 days, really hasn't been able to become sustained. The issue with our lack of winter storms has not been the southeast ridge. It's more been because of the location of the ridge over the west coast than anything else. Let's see. Got any more questions? And I just want to say, as far as any other weather provider, maybe I kind of broke my rule a little bit. I like to stay away from critiquing other forecasters. So I will say this. I see what other people are seeing. I'm seeing the potential. I'm a little bit more careful with the wording just because of my experience of how I word things. When I was younger, I was a lot more, bold in my declarations, right? And I learned that can have a negative impact on businesses and individuals making plans. So, as much as I would love to make very bold statements and make very bold declarations and then claim, quote-unquote, victory, whatever the heck that is, I think it does more harm than good for the general public, for our industry. So I tend to stay away from those comments. What I try to do is back up my thoughts with science and show you the observations and the data to support that. And then you prepare accordingly. But when making declarations about historic winters, saying that this winter will be one to remember or historic or anything of that nature, it's very dangerous, because what if you're wrong and you lose all credibility? So I try to stay away from that. Will there be any wind issues this weekend? That's a great question. All right, so the jet streak associated with our rainfall is not all that strong. I think there'll be some breezy conditions. I'm talking about maybe 20, 25 mile per hour wind gusts possibly, but nothing that should really hamper any celebrations or anything of that nature. I think that a lot of the stronger winds are going to be over the Atlantic Ocean. We appreciate your more nuance than others. Thank you. I appreciate it. The last few years, the spring was cold and took a while to finally arrive. Do you think that will happen again this year? You know, with La Nina weakening, it opens up the potential, if we get the polar vortex to stretch at the right time in February, it opens up the potential for a cold start to March. But I have to see the polar vortex and see where that sets up in early February. If I'm seeing a lot of indication of stretching and interruption and disruption of the polar vortex in February, that would open up an early cold March. But then by mid to late March, I think we warm right back up. What's going to be interesting to see is if, as we head into spring, if we start to see more of influence of an El Nino trying to develop, and then how that will influence the jet stream and the subtropical jet stream. Because your polar jet stream starts to relax a little bit more, but your subtropical jet stream sends a lot of short waves into the plains, increasing severe thunderstorm outbreaks and producing a more active pattern over the eastern United States. So that should be interesting to watch, see how that evolves. But in terms of a cold start to spring, i.e. March, I really want to see where we are in the polar vortex before making any declarations. And yeah, I mean, I get the idea of having a big snowstorm in January, February, March. Look, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I would love to say, without a shadow of a doubt, that we're going to see major snowfall in January, February, and March. I mean, for one, it would verify my forecast. Two, let's be honest, generate more income for me. Yeah, I mean, obviously, and for you, especially if you are a snow removing company or whatnot. But as it stands right now, based on the data right now, I can't give you a definitive answer on that. That's just being honest, because I don't know what this new pattern is going to look like once we head to mid-January. I think the potential is going to be a lot more favorable. I think we'll have a better potential to seeing winter storms, but I don't know what the outcome is going to be. Well, we're about 8:55 right now. I think that's it for tonight. If anyone has any more questions, I will take them now. And if not, then I think we'll shut it down for the night. My voice is starting to go too, so.
I need a cup of tea.
Yeah, definitely a cup of tea. Maybe some green tea. Yeah. But, yeah, I think that is it for tonight. Okay, so we'll be back again tomorrow night. I mean, not tomorrow night. Next week. I'm doing good. I am doing good. We'll be back next week in the new year, after I get some sleep, because apparently I don't even know what day it is anymore. And, yeah, right? Jeez. You know what it is? It's because of that time period between Christmas and New Year's. You don't know what day it is anymore. You don't know what to do it yourself. If you have a business or you work for somebody and you have to get something done, no one's around to answer an email or pick up the phone, because either they're on vacation or they're pretending to be on vacation. So, we got one more. Any Mets thoughts? Well, I'm curious to see whether they sign Cora. But I'm just happy to have an owner that actually knows how to build a team and doesn't go cheap on everything anymore. So go for that. Okay, guys, that's it for tonight. I am going to shut it down. I will see you in 2023. I hope you all have a wonderful, happy new year. And as always, stay safe out there.